Yeah, good morning. It's Uncle Lou here. That's right, it's me, Uncle Lou, and guess what? I'm live for you on LouTube today. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. Also, in addition to that as well, subscribe to this channel if you're not already. Do you know I post college football videos almost every single day of the year? It's true, and believe it or not, some of them are even watchable. Around this time every year, I do a whole series of schedule preview videos. These aren't predictions. I'm going to go team by team, pick a team, put their schedule up on the screen. We're just going to go through and look at the schedule, compare it to last year's. What do the non-con games look like? What about the league games? Who do they play at home? Who do they play away? What about cross-division games? Rivalry games, trap games. Where's the bye week? Is the bye week in a good spot? Is it in a bad spot? Trap games, difficult stretches of games. Maybe a team plays 2 or 3 tough teams in a row, or 3 out of 4 games in a row are tough. Anyway, we just take a look at the schedule and kind of discuss it in detail. We're going to do that starting today. And up first, that's right, my Georgia Bulldogs. Shout out to Tina M over on the Uncle Lou Patreon page. She suggested that I do this Georgia schedule preview. There's a whole bunch of suggestions already over on the Patreon page. I'm just going to start there, go through that list, do one team at a time until we work through the entire list on the Patreon page. And then I'll start taking suggestions from the comments section on these videos here on YouTube. If you're not signed up on the Uncle Lou Patreon page and you want to check it out, there's a link in the description of this video that'll take you over there. Just click the link. You can have a look around. The Patreon page is a great way to support this channel. I do this full time, and it's not easy in the off season to make a college football channel work. And without the good people over on the Patreon page, I would not be able to do it. So big shout out to everybody over there. And Tina M, this one's for you. Georgia Bulldogs schedule preview. Of course, they got the spring game coming up in a couple of weeks. Not going to spend much time talking about that. I may do some separate videos on some of these teams' spring games. We want to look at the regular season schedule here. Now, they kick things off in a neutral site game against Oregon. This is similar to last year. Georgia started with a neutral site game against Clemson. That one was played in Charlotte. This one's going to be played in Atlanta. Oregon's a pretty good team, definitely a top 25 team. Some may argue higher, top 10, top 15, top 20. Came up a little bit short last year in the Pac-12, losing to Utah in the regular season and in the Pac-12 title game. But they have won some Pac-12 titles over the last few years. Big question mark for Oregon, of course, first-year head coach Dan Lanning, who, ironically, comes from Georgia, right? He was the defensive coordinator at Georgia for the last few years. Of course, last year, one of the all-time great defenses in college football history at Georgia. Dan Lanning takes over now at Oregon. This is a tough spot for Oregon here to have to open 2,000 miles away in what basically will be a home game for Georgia, right? UGA is in Athens. This game's in Atlanta, a little over an hour drive. 80-90% Georgia fans probably at this game. And, Oregon, they've got some talent. I like Dan Lanning. I think he's got what it takes to become a successful head coach. Hard to see Oregon pulling off the upset here, though, in Dan Lanning's first ever game as a head coach. But this is one of those games this offseason that people are kind of pointing to as one of the more interesting non-con games to kick off the season. And there's a whole bunch of them. I've done a series of videos about some of the great non-con games we have to look forward to in 2022. You can scroll back a few weeks on the channel if you want to check those out. But this will be a good game. Definitely not a gimme for Georgia. I expect Georgia to be favored in that game. But an interesting way to kick off the season in 2022 for UGA. They follow that up with their first home game of the year, another non-con game, this time against FCS Samford. This should be a, fourth stringers game. By the second half, you're probably going to be looking at a running clock, and you're going to have, this will be one of those deals where you have to have the a Georgia roster in front of you to be able to tell who's actually on the field. Probably the bench will empty for Georgia in the second half of this game. A lot of players going to get some playing time in the second half of that one. Then the SEC schedule starts, and this is no cupcake here. On the road at South Carolina. Now, traditionally, South Carolina has not been a very good team within the SEC, but they are one of the teams that, in my opinion, has a pretty significant home field advantage. Good enough to beat Georgia? I don't know. A lot of people are going to be aiming for Georgia this year as they're defending national champions. South Carolina brings in a lot of talent through the transfer portal this offseason. Spencer Rattler, along with the tight end from Oklahoma. Whatever we think about Spencer Rattler, and maybe he didn't handle things the right way last year when he was benched in favor of Caleb Williams. There's reports and rumors that maybe he's not a great teammate. A lot of people don't like him because of his attitude and personality on that QB1 show that he was on when he was in high school. Who knows? I mean, sometimes a change of scenery and a little bit of maturity can do wonders for people. I do think he's an extremely talented player. One of the most talented players that South Carolina has ever had, if you just go off of recruiting rankings. I mean, they had some good ones, Jadeveon Clowney, Marcus Lattimore. Spencer Rattler's right up there in terms of recruiting rankings, and he's going to have an opportunity to prove himself in the SEC. I'd be shocked if anybody other than Spencer Rattler started the season as quarterback for South Carolina. Now, some bigger issues. Who do they throw the ball to? Who do they hand it off to? Who blocks? Who tackles on defense? And who covers receivers? Spencer Rattler only plays one position. I do think South Carolina exceeded expectations last year, and I expect them to possibly even take another step forward this year in 2022. Shane Beamer. South Carolina fans got mad as hell when I kept calling him Frank last year. But anyway, Shane Beamer, first-year head coach last year. People had South Carolina penciled in for 3 or 4 wins, and they did much, much better than that. So there are some expectations going into this season in Columbia. Not an easy game for Georgia. Again, one that they'll be favored in and should win. But if you're looking for difficult games on Georgia's schedule, or if you're looking for games on Georgia's schedule that they could potentially lose, this is one I think you have to circle. A lot of really good Georgia teams have gone into Columbia, South Carolina, and left with a loss. And, of course, 3 seasons ago, a top 5 Georgia team was defeated by like about 3 or 4 win South Carolina team. That game was at home for Georgia in Athens. So it's not like it can't happen. If you're a Georgia fan for more than a couple of years, you've seen it happen, losing to an inferior South Carolina team. But that kicks off the SEC schedule for UGA. And then they play one more non-con game at home against Kent State. So in the first month of the season, really only one true road game, and that's on the road at South Carolina. 2 home games against Samford and Kent State, and then the neutral site game against Oregon, which is basically a home game for Georgia. Georgia will handle Kent State without a problem. Another one sort of like the Samford game. I expect to see a lot of backups in the second half of that one. After the Kent State game, they have a road game at Missouri. So first 2 SEC games next season for Georgia, both come on the road. Missouri might be the worst team in the SEC East, though. I know Florida was pretty bad last year. Tennessee, I think, is on the way up. Kentucky, they had a pretty good year last year, too. I think they're still better than Mizzou. Mizzou will probably be picked to finish last in the SEC East this year. That doesn't mean they will, but at this point in the year, when you're talking about games that are going to be played 6 months from now, you don't have a whole lot of actual, information to go on in terms of what the teams are going to look like during the season, but not very high expectations for Mizzou. You have to assume Georgia's going to be a pretty big favorite in that one. Then they play home against Auburn, and Auburn is Georgia's cross-division opponent that they play every single year. Georgia and Auburn play every year, even though Georgia's in the East and Auburn's in the West. And Georgia has actually just owned and dominated this series really for the entirety of the 21st century. I think Auburn has only beat Georgia something like 3 times in the last 16 or 17 years. The last time they beat us was the 2017 regular season game. Georgia, of course, avenging that loss in the 2017 SEC title game. Auburn's a mess. At this point in the season, I expect Auburn to already have a loss, maybe 2. They host Penn State early in the year. We all know what happened a month or so ago with their head coach, Brian Harsin, when basically the boosters attempted the college football version of a coup, trying to get him fired while he was on vacation in Mexico. It was just a mess. A lot of allegations were made back and forth. The school decided to keep him, but it seems to me like it's one of those, the horse is already out of the barn type of deals, pun included there by saying barn. I think it's going to be a bumpy road for Auburn's head coach this season. I mean, as soon as they lose their first game and every game after that, there's just going to be a tidal wave of fans that just gets bigger and bigger as the season goes along that are calling for his firing. I would be shocked if Harsin was the head coach of Auburn in 2023. I can't see him making it past this season as Auburn's head coach. It's a home game for Georgia. They'll be a significant favorite in that one. Georgia follows that up with another SEC home game, this time against Vandy. And again, a game where Georgia should be a significant favorite. Talked about Mizzou being the worst team in the SEC East. It could very well be Vandy. They just can't recruit on the level of the other SEC East teams. Historically, they've struggled in the SEC. I think everyone knows that. Vandy has beat Georgia before. Vandy has beat Kirby Smart. In fact, in 2016, Georgia lost to Vandy at home on homecoming. So it can happen, but I don't think very many people would be predicting it to happen. You would expect Georgia to get a comfortable win there. And then they get their bye week. Georgia's bye week always comes at a pretty good time, in my opinion. It comes about halfway through the season every year, and it comes right before the Florida game, which, of course, is Georgia's biggest rival, and usually one of their biggest games of the year. And if you're a Georgia fan, the Florida game is always big, regardless of how good or bad either team is. Now, I don't have high expectations for Florida this year. It's got nothing really to do with Billy Napier, their new head coach. He may end up being a pretty good coach, but talent-wise, they are just miles behind right now. They got to figure out the quarterback situation. Emory Jones is leaving. Anthony Richardson is staying. They bring in Jack Miller from Ohio State. They got to figure that out. They've got talent deficiencies at almost every position on both sides of the ball. It appears to be, I don't know if you want to call it a rebuild or a restart. It doesn't seem like this is going to be Florida's year to make that much noise in the SEC or the SEC East. Are they going to be 4-8 or 5-7 or something like that? Probably not. They're probably going to win 7, 8, or 9 games, I would assume, somewhere in that range. I wouldn't expect them to be able to beat Georgia this year, though, in Napier's first year in Gainesville. Of course, this is also a neutral site game played in Jacksonville every year. Barring something very strange happening in the first month of the season, again, I would assume Georgia would be a pretty significant favorite in this game. Now, Georgia follows that game up with a game at home against Tennessee. And I talk a lot of trash about Tennessee on this channel. Obviously, if you've been around for more than 5 minutes, you know that. I think Tennessee is going to be even better this coming year than they were last year. They returned the quarterback. They've got some playmakers on offense. They run that hurry-up offense that can catch teams sleeping, napping, unable to get off the field, tired, wears them out, that kind of thing. It also affects Tennessee's defense, though. And from a Tennessee perspective, that's the issue right now, I think, is their defense. Now, I am thankful that Georgia gets this game at home this year. Again, I think Georgia will be a double-digit favorite in this game. Again, if you're looking for games potentially that Georgia could slip up and take a loss, I guess this would be one of them. I think it would be much more likely Georgia slipped up and took an L if this game was in Knoxville. Georgia should win this game. We'll see. But I do think Tennessee will be an improved team over what we saw last year, which last year they exceeded expectations. They were, Josh Heupel, his first year as head coach last year, took him a couple of weeks to figure out the quarterback situation. That loss early to Pitt really hurt them. You take the Pitt game and the Ole Miss game, both those games really could have gone either way. They win those 2 games instead of losing them. That's a drastic difference in the record there for Tennessee. I would expect Tennessee to get to 8 wins at a minimum this coming year. Don't know if one of those wins will be against Georgia. Can't pick them to beat Alabama either. Tennessee's got, I guess, 3 big rivals, Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. I do think Tennessee's got a chance to beat Florida this year. That game's in Knoxville. That'll be an interesting game. I think Tennessee, I know, plays Pitt early in the year, and then they play Florida in week 3 or 4, something like that. Somehow Tennessee wins both of those games, then they're well on their way to winning 8, 9, potentially even 10 games. We'll see. But it should be Georgia should be a significant favorite against Tennessee at home. Then Georgia plays their other opponent from the SEC West. This is a rotating opponent. It changes every year. Georgia plays Auburn from the West every year and one other opponent. That other opponent changes from year to year. This year, Georgia goes on the road to Starkville to take on Mississippi State. Mississippi State might be the worst team in the SEC West. Them or Auburn, probably. I would expect Georgia to win this game. Now, Kirby has flubbed some games on the road against the SEC West, but the majority of those came early in his career. He lost a game at Ole Miss early on. Of course, he lost at Auburn, lost at LSU. I would not expect Georgia and Kirby Smart to lose this game on the road at Mississippi State. Should be a game Georgia will win, and again, they'll be a significant favorite. And then they have what I think might be the toughest game of the year, and that's at Kentucky. Kentucky is a little bit of a head-scratcher to me. They I think Stoops does an amazing job there. Again, Kentucky is one of these teams that's not likely to ever recruit in the top 5 or the top 10. But that saying that gets used way too much, but I'm going to say it anyway. He gets the absolute most out of the talent that he does have. They're always well coached. They're big on the lines of scrimmage. Kentucky's downfall last year really was when it came to the Georgia game anyway. They were such a run-heavy team offensively, and it's just I don't know if there's a team that could have beat Georgia last year running the ball. I mean, just running the ball against Georgia last year was almost impossible to do. Kentucky, I think, was leading the SEC in rushing, and their running back finished that game with like -2 yards or something. You have to be able to stretch the field to beat UGA. Now, this is, I'm not telling Kentucky anything they don't know. They've brought in some transfer quarterbacks over the last 2 years to try to improve that aspect of their offense, their downfield passing game. We'll see what it looks like this year. Not that Kentucky is the most difficult place to play. It's not the biggest stadium. But if Kentucky is still relevant in the SEC at this point in the season, the next to the last game, you're getting into mid-November here. If Kentucky is sitting at 1 or 2 losses where a win against Georgia could, potentially mean an SEC East title and a trip to the SEC championship game, then they're going to be plenty motivated. I do think that's a dangerous game for Georgia. I think they'll be a double-digit favorite. Georgia's going to be a double-digit favorite most likely in every game on this schedule, but going 12-0 is hard to do. So when you look at a team like Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, whatever teams, Clemson, whatever teams you want to name that you think have the ability to go 12-0, you have to start looking at games where, okay, where could they possibly trip up and lose? Maybe this game at Kentucky is that game for Georgia. And then, of course, Georgia finished things off just like they do every single year with their in-state rivalry, the Georgia Tech game. This year they play in Athens. Georgia Tech, I think they've beat Georgia twice this century, 2 or 3 times. Georgia has just completely owned and dominated this series lately. This is another team, I think, that's going to be replacing their head coach after this season. What's his name, Jeff Collins? It's not working out for him in Atlanta. They are getting worse, it seems like, every single year. They lost what, in my opinion, is their best player to the transfer portal in the offseason, running back Jahmyr Gibbs transferring to Alabama. I don't have much expectations at all for Georgia Tech this upcoming year. This should be another big win in this series for Georgia. So, okay, you take the non-con schedule. It's pretty similar to last year. They've got one big non-con game. That one's against Oregon to start the season. They've got their annual game against Georgia Tech to end the season. Last year, we started off with Clemson, ended with Georgia Tech. This year, start off with Oregon, end with Georgia Tech. And then you've got 2 sort of, just fill in some space type of teams here. No disrespect to Samford or Kent State, but in no way should they be competing with the University of Georgia, and I don't expect that they will. When you look at the conference schedule, of course, the East schedule is the same every single year, just rotates home and away. So this year we get Auburn and Tennessee at home. Last year played Auburn and Tennessee on the road. I think these years, these even number years, at least when it comes to the East, is more favorable for Georgia. Those are the years we get Auburn and Tennessee at home. Odd years, we play them on the road. So generally speaking, Georgia's Eastern Division schedule, in my opinion, always a little bit easier in the even number years. We do have to make that trip to South Carolina, our first SEC game, or Georgia's first SEC game of the season. I think that's a tricky game, and I think the last SEC game of the season at Kentucky is a tricky game. Again, these aren't prediction videos, so I'm not here to tell you Georgia's going 12-0 or 11-1 or 10-2 or 9-3. I do prediction videos later on in the offseason, usually starting in June. These videos, I just like to take a look at the schedule. Trap games, don't know that there's a trap game here unless it's at Mississippi State, right? You play Florida and Tennessee in back-to-back weeks. That's 2 pretty big games in the SEC East. I know Florida was down last year. Tennessee's been down since the iPhone was invented. But those are 2 big games every year in the SEC East, and those are 2 big games for Georgia every single year. They have to play those back-to-back. Then they take a road trip to an unfamiliar opponent with a sort of a tricky offense led by Mike Leach at Mississippi State. And then they, of course, a game that could decide the East at Kentucky to close things up. So maybe if you're looking for a trap game, it's that Mississippi State game on the road there When is that? Is that November 12th? I believe that's November 12th. So there you go. That's Georgia's schedule for 2022. If you guys and girls want to make some predictions down in the comments section, I'd be curious to see what you think Georgia's record will be in the regular season for 2022. I think they'll be a significant favorite in every single game, probably a double-digit favorite in every single game. But let me know what you think. Anyway, I appreciate you watching. I'll be uploading these on a regular basis almost every single day from, for now, probably through the end of April at least. Again, let me know in the comments down below which team it is you'd like to see me do. I'm going to take suggestions off the Patreon page first. So if you're on the Patreon page, make sure you go over there. I've made a post asking for your suggestions. You'll see it when you go over there. Just type the team out in the comments that you'd like to see me do. I'm going to do the Patreon suggestions first, then circle back around to these videos and go through the comments section and pick out some of the teams, some of the other teams that you all want to see me do. Appreciate you watching. Have a good morning.